Hi, welcome to a chat with Dominic Stokes and me, Amanda Zimmerman. We're going to talk more about downtime, and specifically, what we're going to talk about is the worst waste. So, this is a conversation that we started a few months ago with Lean Portland, and Dominic and I have talked a few times offline, just kind of continuing the conversation, but we thought it would be fun to share it with others. So, today we're going to talk about those downtime wastes that started with Toyota, that started as those 7 deadly wastes, but now we've expanded it to 8. I like to use the acronym downtime. Dominic, do you like downtime or Tim Woods?
I like Tim Woods. It's
Ooh,
just something that it was what I learned first. There's
yeah.
no shade being cast though. I can use both.
It's all good, right? It's all identifying waste and helping us to move forward.
Correct.
And so, to you, then, Dominic, what do you think the intent of those downtime wastes? Why do we use this downtime acronym?
The main intent for me is to facilitate conversation that is universal from the shop floor to the executive office. And I know that sounds scripted, but
Nice.
it comes from actual experience seeing it. Um, there are times where somebody that's doing a particular task or a job says, "This job is hard because of XYZ," and they explain why it's difficult for them. And somebody can hear that and not empathetically feel that that's that big of a deal.
Mhm,
And sometimes you
mhm,
have to use language that associates with the way that they see the world and the way that they're judged. So if you said,
yeah,
"I'm experiencing 15 defects per second," rather than "this part always comes to me broken," it means something else. It resonates a little bit differently. And I've seen people change their tune after being told the same thing for weeks, months, and then they
mhm,
finally hear it a different way and they say, "Wow, I never thought about it like that. We need to get you help as soon as possible." And that's what
yeah.
initially gets people into that space, Gemba, so that they can start to kind of tear this down and break it down to find out how to get over the waste that they're experiencing. So I feel like
Mhm.
it's the precursor to, I don't want to say Kaizen because Kaizen is its own thing, but it starts the conversation between people that otherwise would not meet face to face.
Yeah, and I think, I haven't really thought about it that way in terms of developing the common language. I always think of it as just a memory jogger, right? As something that we can use so really quickly we can start to remember those terms and identify those wastes. And
Mhm.
what we mean by wastes, if you're not familiar with downtime, we can look at our processes and all the steps within our processes. And some of those steps are going to be value added, and some of those are going to be non value added. And downtime or Tim Woods is simply an acronym that we can use to help to remember those different wastes. And so, for example, in downtime, it's defects, overproduction, waiting, not using people well, transportation, inventory, motion, and excess processing. So, those are all different types of wastes that we can look for in our workplace and then be able to have that common language with our management team to be able to say, hey, I have this issue of overproduction in this line
Mhm.
versus, hey, I have a lot of stuff in my workspace and I don't like it.
A simpler way that I've heard other people digest what I just said earlier is that it's a quantifiable language. So if you try to say things and you don't get that same feeling from somebody else whenever you tell them that you have defects or you're experiencing too much transportation, um, using the wastes to convey your pain
Mhm.
is easily quantifiable using other lean tools that I'm sure we're going to get into in the future.
Absolutely. And I was just debating whether to try to adjust my audio. So if anybody has any issues with the audio in the comments, let me know. Um, so then, we came together because a few months ago, I guess it's been now, is we both attend Lean Portland, which is a totally free monthly workshop. They offer free classes as well throughout the month. So if you haven't checked them out, their information's in our description here. And we met through that. And you actually led about 2 months ago a event where we talked about the worst waste. So we looked
Correct.
at all these different wastes with people who are familiar with them, and we had kind of a fun little competition where we used brackets to get down to that worst waste. Do you want to tell us how that kind of turned out?
Yes. So, just a small synopsis. I used a double elimination bracket layout and listed the 8 wastes, and we pitted 2 wastes against one another. had people volunteer to speak about why one waste was worse than another one, all surrounding a theme of quality or delivery or safety, or cost. And each person had to sway the rest of the group to agree that their waste was the worst based on their
Mhm.
example. And it ranged from anything from manufacturing examples to examples about emails, to examples about baking a cake and finishing the
Mhm.
frosting, and if overprocessing was present. And it went really well. It gave people a chance to feel comfortable explaining some times where they were vulnerable.
Mhm.
And it was in a space that was a little bit more safe because the goal wasn't to focus on their waste. It was to, I don't know, maybe subtly focus on their waste, but it wasn't somebody pointing the finger at them. It moved pretty fast paced. And afterwards, I remember some people saying that it was a good way to kind of teach lean to people that, or let's just say the wastes. It's a good way to teach the wastes to people that really haven't had time to kind of hold it themselves.
Mhm.
And once you get through the first round, a lot of other people are willing to participate. So I think that it went
Yeah.
really, really well. And I plan on doing it again in the future with Lean Portland. There's just some other events that are happening in the next coming months.
Yeah, and I think it went really well, and I liked that it was really small, right? We only had like a
Yes.
minute or two to like make our case for a certain waste before we moved on. But I think, one of those things in that worst waste, taking the double bracket approach, right, is very maybe a little more democratic, a little bit,
Hmm.
less individuals being able to maybe to vote for theirs. So with that, which waste ended up being the worst waste with that activity?
I believe it was defects,
Oh, it was defects.
which by the book,
Hmm.
if we look back and Google it, technically that is not the worst waste. There's a
Oh,
there's an
okay.
actual prescribed waste, given to us by the experts that is the worst, and there's a good reason behind it. But it's not one that I agree with, and I don't think it's one that you agree with either, Amanda. Maybe you do. I don't know.
I would agree that it is not my top waste that I
Okay.
would choose as the worst waste. However, it does have an entire methodology and framework around it, right? Because Six Sigma is focused on reducing and eliminating defects. So I think it's an easy one for us to say this is the worst because especially people from a Six Sigma background, we're focused day in and day out on defects.
Correct. And that is a very quantifiable waste, especially with the different belt categories of Lean Six Sigma and what you're
Mhm.
expected to return with each project.
So, what do you think then? Like, one of the things that's always driven me crazy in continuous improvement, working with different consultants, is like this idea that we have to be perfect about which waste we're choosing, right? Like, so if we teach the downtime wastes or the Tim Woods, and then somebody comes to you inevitably at the end and they're like, is this transportation or is it motion, right?
Hmm.
Or is this a defect or overproduction? And it's like there's a fear within them that they can't just choose one. Like,
Yes.
have you seen this as well?
Yes. And that's actually what, so let me explain why I saw this as well. It's difficult if somebody has never spoken in this language. It's almost likened to learning how to read music.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have to wrestle with it for a little bit, and you really don't master it until you start to play an instrument with it,
Mhm.
and you start to use the tool with the script,
Mhm.
maybe call it that. um in the beginning, whenever people are so buried in deciding what to name this waste, sometimes it's nicer to take a step back and kind of group those seven wastes into smaller wastes, into, I'll say, smaller groups, so that you can
Okay.
just say, I've identified it as one of these three. Let me move forward. And this actually goes into, if you're ready to talk about it, the
Yeah.
the method. Okay, so in my personal pilgrimage to learn more about all of this, I came across this method called the Yamada method, and there's a person that trained under Taiichi Ono in Toyota, and his name was Hitoshi Yamada.
Mhm.
And this person ended up running, well, they try to say, and I'm reading this so that I don't butcher it. They try to say that he was actually one of the very few people with direct authority from Taiichi Ono to carry on the legacy of the Toyota production system. Like, it was physically written down. And he took that methodology and thinking to Canon, the camera company,
Okay.
and another electronics company, Sanya, or not Sony. Oh, maybe it is Sony. But I'll put a link to that in the description after this, or we'll work with Amanda to do that.
Yeah.
But the point was that he condensed the wastes into three things that were very different to tell apart and that made sense and that were listed in an order for a reason. So the three are stagnation,
Mhm.
transportation, and motion. Inside of the bucket stagnation is overproduction,
Okay.
overprocessing, inventory, waiting, and defects. All five
Hmm.
of those, in some aspect, either make the person that's experiencing that wait, the person before or the person after that point of conflict wait. So that's just stagnation. If you see something sitting, that's bad. The next
Mhm.
one is transportation, and the last one is motion. So those were listed in an order of precedence. And that still rings true with the textbook solution of overproduction is textbook wise the worst waste. That's why it's the first one listed underneath stagnation. But if you were to tell
Mm.
somebody for the first time learning this, is that inventory, is it moving? No, that's stagnation. Is
Mhm.
that defect preventing somebody else from down the line working? Yes, that's stagnation. It's easier rather than you looking at a list to try to match and play like go fish with which waste is this thing that I'm seeing. Stagnation, transportation, and motion are just simpler to say out loud. So that's why I like that. And
Mhm.
that's where I think it's easier to teach others for the first time.
Do you think it matters so much if they perfectly? Because to me, like, the thing that drives me crazy is I just want people to start seeing the waste, especially when I'm first teaching them. This
Mhm.
is I just want people to be able to say, like, "Hey, here's an inventory issue. Here's motion. Here," like, I don't care that they perfectly classify it in the right group, just so much that they recognize it. And I think, so that for me is kind of what I'm looking for. But what do you think about that? Do you think that's, like, too laid back?
I think it's just the way that I am, but
Mm,
I think being very disciplined on these basics leads to you being able to be relaxed later. And I don't want to
mm,
sound like a stickler. I'm not trying to like, I don't know, hint back on like organized sports or like taekwondo or something like from my past. I'm just
mhm,
saying that like if you're able to drill this into the minds of the people that are going to be the voice for how the company's going to move forward early enough,
mhm,
and there's a consensus on yes, that is transportation, even if it doesn't fit the definition. If you make it your own definition, but everybody's saying the same thing, personally, I think that there's a little bit more power in the movement of everybody saying the same thing rather
mm,
than everybody understanding the intent on their own terms, because
mm,
it might not move fast enough for some of the bigger and better things that can happen once everybody gets that out of the way.
mhm,
But
mhm.
I also understand what you're saying. It's fun to teach people something that they've never seen before in a different way to see. I'm a little bit more of a stickler. I'm sorry.
That's okay, that's okay. I mean, I think this is a good time too to just say kind of where we came together, right? Like,
Yeah,
we met in Lean, Portland, but then throughout different events, we found that we just have kind of, I don't know if I'd say similar mindsets or approaches to continuous improvement, but we definitely aren't aligned on everything. So I thought it
no,
would be fun to have a conversation like this with you because I think you're very open-minded and genuine. So I know that we're going to get like good information, like have a good conversation. But can you tell us as well, like I didn't give you a chance to introduce yourself.
yeah. I'll do the standard intro. So my name is Dominic Stokes. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've worked in two different types of manufacturing environments. After that, I've been in management consulting. So I'm taking this opportunity now to see a lot of different things and test a
Mhm.
lot of different things. I love lean. I try to implement it in my personal life as much as possible, to the point where my friends do not like that I'm that nerdy about it. And like Amanda said earlier, like something just clicked whenever we talked after some of our events. And I can attest that it's very comfortable to speak with you about these things because you've never passed the judgment of what are your qualifications?
Mm,
Show me the degrees of where you've been and prove to me that you know these things. I'm reading books. I'm physically trying this at home with laundry bins and the way that I
mhm,
get food from the grocery store or the way that I do house projects in the backyard. And I feel like that holds some sense of credibility as well
mhm,
alongside of it's not the same, but it still holds some sense of credibility to the accolades that you can get from degrees and working in larger industries. So I just think that it's really nice for us to talk that way. But that's who I am. I'm somebody that likes to practice and likes to talk um, in a never-ending manner about the tools that exist and how to
mhm,
apply them. And if I could say one more thing,
mhm,
every single time that I've learned about a tool, it's always been in a crisis mode. I've never just gently been introduced to, wow, like here's what we're doing right now. Here's this great tool. Here are the seven wastes. Let's learn about
mhm,
these. It's always been firefighter hat on, hose being pulled out of the truck. We need to figure this out. What's the one thing that we can rely on? And I've seen the resilience of some of the tools shine through. And then it makes me so mad that I didn't know that beforehand because I feel like we could have prevented it had we just started with that tool or used another tool to prevent needing to use that tool. So um, I like to inventory my own digital toolbox of just different things that I've learned to
mhm.
try to solve different problems.
Yeah, I think that that's, a really interesting perspective in that, we tend to cut our teeth on crisis mode, right? When we're in that consulting world, people don't usually call you in because everything's going
Perfect.
well.
Correct.
Yeah, like
They
when
need
the
help.
business is all running well, they're not going to call a big expensive consulting firm and have you come in, right?
Mhm.
It's usually businesses that are struggling, that they don't know if they can continue, that they have to save a certain amount of money to be able to be viable. So you come in and you're often in crisis mode, and that means that not only you are, aware of that situation, but everybody that you're working with is aware of
100%.
that situation.
As soon as they see somebody that doesn't work with them, they know that change is coming or somebody's going to try to explain something in a different manner or they're here
Mhm.
to see the aftermath of what had burned up. And I just don't think that that's it's natural because it's the majority, but I just don't think that that's the right way to be introduced to how
Mhm.
opportunistic it is to understand and like really embody the intent of these tools.
Well, and so that brings me then to my worst waste.
Go ahead.
So in this way, I think we can both be right with what my opinion is. Um, and that's really, kind of what you're getting at there as well is respect for people, right? Is the more that we can have respect for people, the more the organization is going to succeed, the more that we can get better ideas out there. So,
Mhm.
for me, the worst way, since I look at it from a downtime, I include the not using people well or skills. And
Yeah.
to me personally, I see that as the worst waste that we have all of this talent on the line. We have all of these amazing people, and we don't ask them for their opinions, or we don't hire in a diverse way. So, we don't get that difference of opinions where
Yeah.
we see these different gaps come up that we wouldn't have even realized that end up going out to the customer. Um, and so to me, that is what I get really passionate about is making sure that we have that respect for people and getting their ideas out there, getting them willing to share their mistakes and challenges, because that's the only way that we can actually find out that there's overproduction, that we can really see that there's mistakes, that we can really get the energy to make changes. Now, that said, what you talked about with stagnation, transportation, and motion, and
Mhm.
the examples you gave there, I think, I could be wrong, but I think skills or not using people well were not included because that is the eighth waste that was added later.
Correct.
So traditionally, it would not be included at all. So in that way, I think maybe we're both, we can both feel like we're on the same page.
I still feel like we're on the same page. And I think that a lot of that goes to the culture that existed, from what I've read, in the entire Toyota industry company. Like, in a sense, their backs were against the wall in the 70s and 80s trying to make cars for the American market. And they had to really pull together, without quoting any books, but really pull together to get smart about the way that they used their resources, and planned on making a lot of variation to satisfy a lot of markets without being able to hold that much inventory in the end. So
Hmm.
I think that the respect for people was just intrinsic within it all, in a sense. And maybe that culture doesn't translate to the cultures that exist whenever you don't hire in a diverse nature, or you wait until it's too late to ask people for their opinions, and you've already designed a product that's being produced. Like, it might just not work in the culture that we have, in the cultures that we've seen now.
Hmm. I agree. And I think it's kind of like the 6S dilemma to me, right? Is to me, I have a hard time if you know 5S's. Some companies do 6S. So the sixth S is safety.
Safety.
But to me, everything we do every single day, we should have that focus on safety. So
Correct.
it should be within all of those 5S's each and every day. But I guess kind of in the same way, skills or not using people well, that should be represented across all of these different ways, right? When we
It
look at
should.
the way Toyota developed this, respect for people was at the core
Yeah.
of the Toyota production system.
That is the main parts, like, of whenever some of the other books that I've read, it says that lean is two things: continuous improvement and respect for people. And
Mhm.
that's like, they have to be 50-50. One can't have the lion's share whenever you're drawing it on the pie graph or the circle. This is, you can't get around the respect for people part and have enough soldiers to fight the battle of continuous improvement every single day, because it doesn't stop. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes too we get laxed, thinking like, okay, finish that project and we're just going to skate off of these gains. That wasn't even enough in the essence of lean and TPS. Like, okay, that's good. Analyze that process again and see if you can take any more waste out. Or you might have to just do it in phases. I haven't seen a situation, not that I have that much personal, like, living years experience, where somebody was able to eliminate three wastes all at the same time in one fell swoop. So I think that that aspect of continuous improvement too keeps people kind of moving towards, um, looking at it again, seeing if anything
Mhm.
has popped back up. It's just like gardening. If I want to draw, I won't draw too many metaphors in this, because I know that a lot of people that I
Okay.
know do not like, because I'll start on one topic and all of a sudden I'm talking about gardening or grocery shopping. And they're like, wait a second, how did you get from manufacturing to making a pizza? And I'm like, it's the same thing. And they don't get it. So I'll try to keep my metaphors a little bit more short lived. But weeds are going to continue to grow, whether you put down a weed barrier or you put down some sort of, like, special thing that you get from the home department store. Like, you have to go and assess that later. It might hold it off for a little bit longer, but it's never just going to get it to go away forever. Even if you
Mhm.
make, even if you concrete it in, something is going to crack in the future, and somehow another weed's going to pop up in between the crack. So, continuous improvement, I think, emphasis on continuous, emphasis
Mhm.
on improvement, and the same amount of emphasis on respect for people.
Mhm.
But I want to try to slide in my worst waste. So, like I said earlier, the textbook definition is that overproduction is the worst waste, because it has been proven that it leads to all of the other ones.
Mhm.
When you overproduce, it can mask that certain things are happening, and it can also, like, be the catalyst for why something starts. But while that happens, and I'm sure that we can all think of situations where overproduction is happening, whether you want to use your house or any other place that you've worked at before, that's the debt that you build up. Overproduction builds
Mhm.
debt. Transportation, my worst waste, is the realization or the paying off of that debt that you have to feel every single day until you get it to go away. And sometimes you've overproduced so much, you're at the point where you can't get it to go away. And you end up making other changes in your physical layout and structure to just accept that extra baggage. So just to turn this into a tactile example, because I have another dimension of this as well, but you could overproduce so much to the point that you have to install different types of storage systems just to hold all of the things that you've made. So now rather
Mhm.
than moving something that could fit in the palm of your hand, you're actually moving it by the unit of pallets with other machines that can't be moved by hand. Now you have to move those things by pallets. And to put pallets away, you need reach trucks and fork trucks and order pickers and turret trucks, and then you need to lay your building out in a different way and buy the building right next to you or lease another space somewhere else and buy a truck to get things from that new space. It just, everywhere that you look, even if you look at a conveyor belt, and like I'm getting goosebumps just saying this out loud, it is just the realization that you have this much overflowing overproduction in your system. So the overproduction I feel like is the silent killer, but transportation is the realization of the debt. It's you paying it off and you paying for it, well, and the pain of paying it off. And then all the things that help transport it have maintenance and can go down as well. Conveyor belts, trucks to go and transport things, pallet racks can break. These things are expensive and they require
Mhm.
extra cost. So you have to see that at the bottom line every year as well. The other dimension of transportation that I feel proves that it's the worst waste for me is that sometimes things are just that large that you have to transport them. In my ideal situation, I'd be able to wake up, watch TV, cook breakfast, take a shower, and like work out, well, sometimes, or do a house project, I'll say,
Mhm.
all without leaving the U shaped cell in my bedroom. But it just doesn't work like
Mhm.
that. Like you have to get to those spaces. Things are just
Mhm.
too large. And to use another real example, just in any industry, there might be a part that your company is using, like a pipe that carries some sort of fluid that's physically so large that you have to use other means of moving it and storing it to hold it and then to install it. And you can't do anything else about it. You can't shrink it down. There's no re atomic organization magic that you can do to like make it smaller or hand size or like bite sized. It's just a big piece of something and you have to transport it. So I really I feel the pain of it and I see it a lot. Um, and I think that that's something that a lot of people can touch and feel rather than touching and feeling overproduction because it may slip past your face if you think that you're just working.
Yeah, it sounds like almost like it's getting down to the root cause, right? Like transportation is very visual. Like we can see it, we see the equipment moving. It's heavy, it's in our way. So it's very physical that we can like touch it and feel it. Even if you're
Mhm.
talking about files on a server, right?
Yeah.
Like copying things, pasting them, sending them this way. Now that one's full. Now, right? Like even that transportation, it's very tangible, whereas
Yes.
overproduction can be challenging. And when you were talking about this, one of the examples that comes up to me is I worked in oil and gas, and I worked on platforms, offshore platforms, for a while.
Mhm.
And I very much care about getting these ideas from the people that are doing the work. They're going to have the best ideas.
Of
And this
course.
idea for a project kept coming up to me over and over again. And that was to fix the elevator. So the people on the ground doing the work every day said, we need to fix the elevator. Now, if you look at a platform, you're talking about something that has multiple stories that people have to run up and down stairs to get to these
Mhm.
different levels. Now, if you talk to the management team about the platforms, what you got was like, ha ha, yeah, they just don't want to go up the stairs, right? Like that this is something that's like a convenience thing of not wanting to go up and down stairs, which certainly, stairs make motion very visible.
Yes.
But the actual issue um, was around down equipment or equipment that had a lot of downtime, which resulted in having to do a lot of transportation of materials.
Yes.
And because those materials were big and bulky, people either had to try to navigate the stairs with them or use the crane. But the crane had bigger, more important things to do than to move around the things for the people working on the platform. So really, when you got further into this, like, hey, it seems like a nice to have an elevator, you actually realized it was a huge transportation issue that
Mhm.
actually you could not necessarily improve crane reliability, but you could better utilize the crane for less cost than it costs to fix the crane. We could fix the elevator and create not only happiness for the employee,
Mhm.
but also more efficient transportation of the goods on site.
And intrinsic to that, safety for everybody. I don't wanna even know
Yes.
what the shape of that material was that you were trying to carry up steps. Even
Mhm.
if it was like a box and it was dense, or if it was longer and you had to make turns as you were going up, I
Or
don't even wanna
multiple
know.
people having to
Yeah,
try and
no
carry
thank
it
you.
down?
Not even
No.
cool.
And what are the chances that equipment could be damaged as well while you're trying to transport it?
Yeah.
The other one that comes up with transportation is a conversation I had with somebody right after we did the downtime wastes, and they started looking for them in their work.
Mhm.
And they were absolutely unwavering that transportation was not a waste. That transportation was a requirement of the work.
You have to sell that to me better. Just because of the whole spiel that I gave, explaining
Yes.
how it's paying off the debt of overproduction.
Yeah.
They're saying that they're so numb to it that they can't get around it, so they have to do it?
They're saying that they have to transport these pieces to be able to complete the work. So
Technically
let's
true.
say it's a
Yeah,
welder. Let's say
yeah.
it's a welder. And the welder, what they do is they go in and they take off the spool.
Mhm.
They take it to the weld shop, they weld it, they take it to the paint shop, it gets painted, it comes back to the weld shop, gets inspected, it goes back onto the piece of equipment, and then gets online, right? So that transportation of that spool to these different places is not waste because we had to transport it.
Are you now can I give my rebuttal on that? Or
Yes, this
okay,
this is this is a conversation that I had
so
or an example. It
rel
wasn't this example that we were talking about. Anyways, go
okay.
ahead.
I would wanna see, is the example that you said physically for one? Because relative to the methods to transport one versus more than one, that's where I think you can realize the ills of transportation. So if you were moving one thing and you could move it in a different manner than you can move 500 of them, that moving 500 is then more of a transportation waste. It's necessary. Just like I said, I can't wake up and do all of those things in my U-shaped cell in my bedroom. I
Mhm.
understand that I have to do that, but I might not need a 15,000 square foot house to do all of those things. I might be able to accomplish that in something that's a little bit more quaint. Not a tiny home, but something that has a little bit less space than the bigger thing. So, in this example, was it one unit? Was it a unit that made sense? Could that have been continuously improved to be moved in a if transportation is inevitable? Was there a better, more simpler mode of transportation if you could reduce the quantity that it was made in?
So, yes. However, I don't think this was the specific example he was using at that
Mhm,
time. It was a similar one, but I don't
mhm.
know that that was the specific example. To me, one of the key things here is that when people hear waste, they think bad. Like intrinsically, they're like, this is bad. I'm
That's
doing
fair.
something wrong. Transportation, we're going to need some kind of transportation. It's likely that spool will need to be transported, right? However, what we want to do is to strive to reduce or eliminate those wastes.
Mhm.
So to me, it's just like what you're saying. Is there a better way for us to do this that didn't require that transportation? So could we weld it next to where we
The paint
took it off?
department, or yeah, or where
Yes.
you took it off or something.
Could the paint department come to that location,
Mhm.
right? Is that going to be more cost effective? Now, in this example, the paint department was actually off-site. So they actually lost things there. So things would get left there and then
No.
no one would ever come to pick them up. And those things would just be like, oh, just lost in time. But that's one of the issues that you have, like you say, with transportation or overproduction or inventory, right? Is that you have the opportunity to lose track of things and have it not be important enough that you recognize it.
Correct. But yeah, I like your example because I can feel that. I can think of somebody that I know that like have a good relationship with that isn't being utilized to their full potential, and I know that they could be better. I know that I could be better. But like that's a very easy. I think both of us brought up very tangible wastes that a lot of other people can see and feel immediately,
Mm-hmm.
and that might be a bit of a an encouragement for them to look for more or to like really learn what one looks like.
Yeah, and it's not like the end of the world that there's waste. Like there's going
Mm-mm.
to be waste in your processes. You're never going to have a process that has zero waste. But
No.
what we want to do is reduce or eliminate it,
Yeah.
right? And so I get frustrated when people feel like they've done something wrong because they found waste in their work. I don't know
Yeah,
how
well,
you feel in that situation.
well, to me, and that's why I pushed back a little bit earlier about we have to be like very serious about explaining the fundamentals, in
Mhm.
my opinion, because that misconception can happen. If if waste is inevitable and it's always going to exist, continuous improvement should prove that even if you tried to fix one of the wastes, it can still be there a little bit in some remaining amount, some trace amount after you try to eliminate or reduce it. It's just if you've been living with it this long, it's not like there's somebody right next door that doesn't have any of it. Like it's something that we have to get comfortable being around. And I think that you get comfortable with it by getting your hands on it and trying to reduce or eliminate it. And if you
Mhm.
eliminate it in one department or in one process, there's another process that definitely still has it that you can go and work on. And if your company wants to grow and they make new products, or they expand and acquire companies, or change the way that they make things, just because of other parts that aren't able to be used anymore, new waste is going to pop up there too. It's as natural as the sun. Like it is just always going to be there. So I
Yeah,
don't know.
and
I
we're
don't.
always going to move to the next one, right? So, like
Correct.
the example with the spool, let's say the welder and the painter now go to that work location and they do all the work on site. Well, now the painter maybe is transporting all their equipment. Maybe the welder is transporting all their equipment. So now you have like a different problem around transportation that you might want to solve.
Yes. Yes. And that's a good way to kind of wrap it back up to what we were talking about earlier. And it's just this is another point of encouragement, to use that example that Amanda's bringing up to try to find a parallel with examples that you experience every single day. Even with
Mhm.
different apartments or houses that you may have lived in, was transportation easier or harder? Did you have more steps at your last place versus the place that you're at now? Are there more motions that you have to make to get into the building or to walk or to open up the garage door? There's just millions of ways to try to continuously practice continuous improvement.
Mhm. Agreed. Agreed. So I know for me to bring in my groceries, I have a gate, I have
Yes.
steps, and I have a door, right? So all of this is carrying all that, transporting all of those items across all of that space. And now I've moved out where it's rural. So now not only that, but I have to transport, I have to go out to to these businesses to be able to purchase things.
Hmm.
So all of that becomes really visible. And that's kind of the curse or, the benefit of continuous improvement is you can now recognize these things and
Yeah.
work in your home to reduce or eliminate them or not consciously make the decision that you're not going to address it
Yeah.
and drive your family crazy sometimes. Yeah.
Sometimes, but they appreciate it in the end.
Sometimes. Yeah, in the end, I like to think that they appreciate being able to access things easier. That's my thought.
The way that I know that I've won is whenever, in a joking manner, somebody that I know that really doesn't care too much about any of the wastes will see me make a mistake and they'll be like, "Whoa, that's over processing. Look at that. You did too much motion. That's why you ended up dropping that cup." And I'm like, "I'll take the joke. I'll embody that. But the joke's on you because the thing that you made fun of me about, you're doing right now." And
That's
I'm so glad that you are.
That's such a great example because I had a class once that we were doing a Kaizen, a week-long Kaizen, and we had to move out of our conference room to one upstairs and a little further away from the shop floor. And some of the naysayers in the class, while we were going down the steps, told me, oh, this is excess motion, da 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 da. And I thought, you're saying this like you want to criticize this, but
Yes.
I'm seeing it as like, hey, you're using the terms, and we're
Yes.
talking about it, and you're recognizing it. So
The joke's
it's
on
funny
them.
how that comes around.
Yeah. Very, very, very funny.
Awesome. Well, this was a super fun conversation, Dominic. I don't know what our next topic is going to be. I know we've chatted about a few different things. If people watching have some ideas, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Maybe do this every 2 weeks or once a month, have kind of a chat, maybe bring some others in and see what other people's thoughts are. I think what we landed on was that traditionally, overproduction is the worst waste.
Correct.
Amanda has the opinion that skills are not using people well is the worst waste. And Dominic has proposed or shared with us today why he sees transportation as possibly the worst waste.
Correct.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dominic, for joining us, and we'll hope to see you back soon. If anybody has any other thoughts, please put them in the comments. We will follow up on that, and we'll put some links in there as well for some of the things that we've talked about today.
Thank you, Amanda.